When it comes to exercise, our body really likes challenge, and for us to switch it up. When it comes to sleep, our bodies prefer consistency. Sleep and exercise, I think, are the two things to really nail down. And then, of course, finding ways to appropriately manage your stress. That looks different for everyone.
Hello, and welcome back to the You're Great podcast with your host, Unique Hammond. I'm excited for today's conversation with Barbie, the Cognition dietitian, who does a beautiful job educating about brain health and longevity of health for women in middle age. I've been following her, and I absolutely love her content. I'm excited to have Barbie on the podcast, a registered dietitian, certified health coach, certified meditation teacher, cognitive wellness specialist, and optimal aging enthusiast. I'm very excited to have this chat today. Something new, something different. I have a lot of interest, not just in healthy hormones, but also in healthy brain aging. So this conversation is well-timed. I'm excited to jump into this today with Barbie. I also wanted to let you know I am currently offering, for those who are current clients of myself or my mentor, Karen, group coaching as a way to just create more community for those on their high fiber love and life. Thanks again for joining me. I hope you enjoy my conversation with Barbie.
Hi, it's nice to meet you.
It's lovely to meet you. I have been loving following your Instagram and all the information that you're putting out for women of middle age, which, it's funny to think about that. I don't even think about middle age. I think, oh, I'm going to be 48, but I guess that means I'm middle-aged.
I mean, it depends. Who knows? But yeah, I mean, we assume. So yeah, but thank you so much. It's lovely to be here with you.
Thank you. And I really loved your live that you did with Dr. Annie Fenn. I've never really spent a lot of time talking to my community about brain health. Mostly I'm talking to them about healthy menopause and healthy body and healthy cholesterol and a low saturated fat diet and high legumes. I noticed that you're really about, and Dr. Fenn was about, for brain health. So I'm excited to have you on to actually talk about brain health, because I did notice before my mom passed that we definitely saw that dementia was kicking in. Thank you for being here to chat about brain health and educate my community about brain health.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me. I really appreciate it.
I was also looking at your website. You're registered dietitian. I've been practicing for 25 years. Mm-hmm. Amazing. Certified health coach, certified meditation teacher, cognitive wellness specialist, and optimal aging enthusiast. So you cover all the bases.
I try to. Yeah. My focus is really, of course, it's evolved throughout my career. It was always on women, because when I was in school, I noticed that there wasn't much of a distinction in recommendations between men and women, with the exception, of course, of pregnancy, lactation. I was always very curious about that. And so I really wanted to find out everything I could about women specifically, because it just seemed obvious to me that we have different needs. And of course, now 20-ish years later, I think that's becoming more and more widely known, widely accepted, widely talked about. Certainly with 1.1 billion women in menopause in a couple of years, I think it's time that we acknowledge the differences and attend to them. So that's really what my work is about, but specifically on women's metabolic health and brain health, because they very much come into play in our 40s and 50s. It's sort of I see it as a window of opportunity to really set us up nicely for our 60s and 70s and 80s and hopefully beyond.
Well, I also think this is a conversation that we're starting to have. Like you just pointed out, most research was around men. Yeah. And even most pharmaceuticals were dosed around men versus women. So we're slowly seeing the shift, and it's kind of mind-blowing that it's taken this long, because, hello.
I know it seems absurd when you think about it. At the same time, research is expensive, it's complicated, but it is unfair that men have been the focus, because it ends up not being appropriate for us much of the time. But it's starting, and with people like Dr. Lisa Mosconi, particularly with brain health. She's really spearheading a lot of sex-specific research for women, and it's just really important. So hopefully, in 10 years, we'll know a lot more and be able to really thrive at this point in our lives, because I think that's so possible. I do think this is shifting too, but just the attitude of women kind of, I don't know, there are all kinds of connotations, just getting older and losing their spark and, kind of becoming irrelevant, and all the things that are sort of, in my opinion, mythology about women at this point in our lives. I personally have never felt better, been more excited about my life. And I know that's true of a lot of women. And I hope that spreads.
Yeah, I heard a 20-year-old influencer say recently that she wasn't going to do Botox or fillers, but when she was 40, she'd get a facelift. And I was like,
Wow.
I was like, wait, what happens at 40 that you need a facelift?
Right, exactly. Well, good luck to her.
I know. I was like, okay. I was sitting, I'm like, I'm about to turn 48. I'm like, I'm not sure how I feel about that comment, but yeah. Are there things that women in their 30s should start thinking about before they even hit that transition in their 40s? Like, what should women in their 30s? Because the people in the community are from their 20s and some are in their 70s. So I have a broad range of women here. So I would love to give little actionable tools to every age group if you're open to it. What do you think?
Absolutely. Oh, that's so fantastic, because these changes that, particularly in the brain, that start happening that can lead to neurodegeneration, they begin decades before we're symptomatic. So it is not too early to start taking care of yourself in your 20s. In your 30s, and certainly your 40s, these changes are actively occurring. It's not too late in your 50s or 60s or even 70s by any stretch, but it's in your 20s and 30s where you can really lay the groundwork for an extremely healthy brain in midlife and beyond. And so all the same rules apply that apply in midlife, that, to our younger years, making sure, if there's one thing that all brain health experts agree on, we can take different points of view when it comes to nutrition, but exercise is absolutely crucial. Moving your body, a combination of cardiovascular activity and strength training, both extremely important in different ways for the brain. One thing that is a real shame about women more our age, is that, growing up in the 70s and 80s and early 90s, we were not encouraged to strength train. It wasn't about being strong. It was about being skinny. And so we wasted decades just trying to achieve a thinner physique, which runs totally contrary to what we now know to be healthy and good for longevity. So strength train, ladies, strength train, and get enough protein to support muscle protein synthesis. Yeah, I would say if you take nothing else away, make sure you're getting enough protein and you are starting to strength train or continuing that effort. But also cardiovascular activity is important. There's sort of a narrative about trying to, I don't know, I almost think it's fear-based about cardio with women, saying it messes with our hormones and raises cortisol and so on. And it does raise cortisol, but that's not a bad thing in the case of exercise, and it doesn't mess with our hormones. We really want to be sure that we are getting enough cardiovascular activity, because that's what delivers oxygen and nutrients to the brain and helps promote BDNF, which is like Miracle-Gro for the brain-derived neurotropic factors. So both are equally important. We want to make sure we're getting both. And then, of course, don't forget about balance and flexibility, more functional exercise, because in your 20s and 30s, most of us, not all of us, but most of us balance pretty well. We're pretty flexible. As we get older, that becomes more of a challenge, and it's really hard to get it back. So endurance, strength, balance, flexibility, I would say exercise is the number one thing. That said, sleep is very much right up there. And sleep can really become an issue in perimenopause, particularly with that decline in progesterone. So making sure you're really protecting your sleep, having a regular routine, getting to bed on time, waking up around the same time, even on weekends. When it comes to exercise, our body really likes challenge. And for us to switch it up when it comes to sleep, our bodies prefer consistency. So sleep and exercise, I think, are the two things to really nail down. And then, of course, finding ways to appropriately manage your stress. That looks different for everyone. And then nutrition. Obviously, as a dietitian, I believe food and nutrition are extremely important. That said, I also believe that there are a lot of different avenues to good health. I don't think there's one specific set of rules that anyone needs to live by, because the most important thing about nutrition when it comes to health is something that you're able to be consistent about. And if it's too restrictive or too off the mark in terms of your preferences, it's not something that's going to last. So sure, there are guidelines about what we know to be the most beneficial, but it also has to fit with your personal lifestyle preferences and what's going to make you happy for the rest of your life,
Yeah, I mean, I talk to a lot of women where they have a really poor relationship to sugar. So they're over consuming sugar all the time, but it's their preference. So if their preference is something that is really detrimental for their long-term health, then how do you balance that? If they're, especially women, I find in my age group, they're starting to get bellies. And one of the things that they'll say is, I love sugar, I love pastries. And you're just like, well, how do you create a mature relationship with something that can be, especially since we're already becoming a little more insulin resistant in this age? How do you create a mature relationship with something that can be detrimental?
Yeah, that's such a good question. And it's such a thought-provoking one, right? Because again, everybody's very unique in this way. Again, as you alluded to, we do have this very natural fat redistribution to the belly area, which can also make visceral fat accumulate, which can lead to insulin resistance. So we do, this change in estrogen changes the way our bodies metabolize glucose and metabolize lipids. And so both our cholesterol and our blood sugar can be a little bit wacky in these years if we're not managing them appropriately. So of course, it is important to establish a healthy relationship with foods that are more, I would say, fun, as opposed to nutrient dense. Nutrient density kind of making up the majority of what you're consuming. And then, but not completely depriving yourself of food that brings you joy, because I believe personally that yes, food is fuel, it is nourishment, but it also is pleasure, and it should be. We should be enjoying what we sit down and eat every day. But I think what I do with my clients, and again, it is very individualized, because one person's relationship with sugar that they feel is problematic is nothing compared to somebody else's, right? So it all depends on how are you using sugar as a coping method for uncomfortable feelings? That's something that we have to address, because that is never going to be a health promoting relationship with food of any kind. That could also be starchy, salty stuff. That could be alcohol. That could be other substances. So anytime we find ourselves not really hungry, but reaching for something to soothe us or to relieve boredom or to handle an emotion, then we have to get super mindful and take a step back and really take ownership over what we're doing. And in my practice, that's a multi-step process. But just for simplicity's sake, I would say we work on being very, very mindful around choices when it comes to foods and beverages. I think the first step is taking full ownership, not allowing the compulsions to happen, because that is a neural pathway and we need to unwind it. And I think that a lot of people they give up too quickly when it comes to behavior change. Because if let's say that your favorite thing is chocolate chip cookies, and you know that you're not always hungry for chocolate chip cookies, but you're using them as a coping mechanism in your life for whatever reason, if you've done that over and over and over, say throughout the last few decades, you've done that 20,000 times, it is ingrained in your mind. You probably don't even have to think about it. You're probably not even aware that you're doing it, going to the pantry and grabbing a handful of cookies. So now we've got to stop that process, take a step back, get super mindful, take full ownership. You can have the cookie, but you've got to say out loud, I am having this cookie, and I'm not having it because I'm hungry. I'm having it because I'm bored. And that's fine. You're allowed, you're a grown up. You can do whatever you want, but know what you're doing and take ownership of it. And then we start to kind of, do all the mindfulness practices. Sit down, never eat out of a bag or a box or a carton. Don't eat standing in front of the fridge. Don't eat standing in front of the pantry, your car, whatever. Sit down, plate it. If you're going to have a snack, savor it, don't just eat it mindlessly. So I would say we work on all of that. I know that was a mouthful.
No, that was great.
It's hard. It's hard work. It's hard work. But I would say mindfulness is the tool that I use for that kind of thing.
Do you also find that clients undernourish themselves in kind of the desire to lose weight? Because there is this rhetoric that in middle age, it's harder to lose weight. But when I start to dig into the literature, I don't know. I mean, is there a possibility of thyroid slowing down at this age? Yes, I believe there is, along with being more insulin resistant potentially as we lose the estradiol. But metabolically, if we're working out and eating well, is there automatically this idea that, oh, you're going to gain the menopause 15?
No. Our current evidence, there was a giant study done in 2021 by Ponzer et al. That determined that our metabolic rate, our resting metabolic rate, really does not change very much in men or women between the ages of 20 and 60. And that was kind of mind-blowing to a lot of people, both men and women, because most humans do tend to gain weight in their middle years, men too. But according to this research, which is very well respected, also he wrote a book called Burn, which is a great book based on his research. If we are to accept that our resting metabolic rate doesn't really change very much, then it's other variables. We've got to look at these other variables. And I will say, and again, I've been doing this for a really long time. I've worked with my own body for my whole life. And I will say that between the age of 47 and 50, I got to where I was 35 pounds outside of my comfort zone. Weight has historically never been an issue for me. I mean, all kinds of problems, weight was not one. And so it really surprised me, and it felt like it crept up. Of course it didn't. I had to take a step back and realize that what was happening was I was allowing my stress to get the better of me. There were some changes happening in my life that I was not managing as well as I thought that I was up here, but it was reflected down here, the way that I was kind of mishandling what was going on in my life. So once I got a handle on that and really paid attention and became a detective, like, okay, where is this coming from? What am I doing differently? Because we always are, even if we feel like we're not, we're always doing something differently. Then it becomes a matter of committing, and being really consistent and being patient. There is some truth, obviously, with a decline in estrogen, muscle mass declines. It can be more difficult to regain muscle mass. So yes, we have to work a little bit harder, but there isn't this dramatic drop in basal metabolic rate like some people sort of think, or even like we used to think before this research in 2021. So that was the very long way of saying, no, it is not inevitable. What typically happens is your lifestyle changes. You're less active, you're eating more, you're not sleeping well, you're stressed, something's going on that is causing weight gain, and it can be managed.
And I'm curious if you see this, that a lot of times in the desperation to lose weight, women will stop eating the important things that anchor the diet, like the protein and the vegetables and the healthy fats, and then they're using these quick sugars to get energy from. And do you see that a lot?
Yeah, sorry, that was the first part of your question. Absolutely. Yeah. I see women changing their eating habits in a way that isn't going to benefit them. There's this, I don't know where this 1,200 calories a day came from. It's insane though. I mean, that's what a toddler needs. It's not what a grown-up needs. And cutting out, I mean, trying to follow all the fads, keto, cutting out carbs, intermittent fasting, none of which is, that works for some people. By no means do you need to adhere to any of that. There's a way to keep yourself, your body composition exactly where you want it to be in a way that makes you happy, that you can do for the rest of your life. So absolutely, I see women not only undernourishing themselves, but doing things that could potentially in the future cause harm. I mean, if gone on for too long, over exercising, under eating, and not getting enough nutrients.
Yeah, the over exercising, under eating, that was definitely my 20s. That's like, this is the way. No, bad idea. Bad for longevity of health, right?
Yes, and not feeling well. I mean, we can feel so good. And I'm not undermining the experience of a lot of women with perimenopause of it really feeling awful. I mean, some women, as you know, sail right through. Other women quite literally have a difficult time getting out of bed, both physically, mentally, and emotionally. And so I'm not undermining that at all, but if with some help, I believe we truly can feel better and even be healthier than we've ever been in our lives. I truly believe that.
I agree. So for the person who's struggling with perimenopause, what would be your kind of tools that you'd recommend for them? Like, hey, if you're struggling with these hormone drops and your sleep is off and you're gaining weight, like what are some actionable steps they can take?
Yeah, so I always approach a client from what I call the 4 pillars of optimal health: nutrition, sleep, exercise, and managing your stress. So again, this is highly individual. Where do you feel like you are struggling most? Because any one of those can have a huge impact on the others. What I see most often is stress being the real culprit, because this can get in the way of good sleep. This can get in the way of time or energy to exercise. This can get in the way of good nutrition choices. So if stress is an issue, we really want to address that first. And that's going to look different for every woman. As a meditation teacher, obviously meditation is sort of my go-to, or breath work, things like that, but that's not going to resonate with everybody. And it's a learning process, being able to use those things effectively for stress. It took me years to be able to really fine tune that. It might be dancing. It might be taking a walk. It might be calling a friend. It might be playing with your pet. It might be raking the backyard. I mean, it could be anything that gives you, I try to say, get a list of 3 things that take 3 minutes that you do 3 times a day. That's kind of my go-to to start filtering out some of those stress hormones and kind of reclaiming your energy and your time, creating boundaries for yourself, and making it really important that you protect your energy, because our energy can be very limited. And then we'll move on to sleep. I would say sleep is the next most important. If that's out of whack, we're just simply not going to have the energy to do all of the things that we can do for ourselves, and it dysregulates appetite. So you're going to be hungrier for starches and sugars and, coffee, too much caffeine. I'm a big believer in coffee personally, but it can definitely be overdone for sure. So I say we start with stress if that's an issue, then we move on to sleep, then exercise is crucial. And quite frankly, I know it may be a little strange as a dietitian, but nutrition is always last for me, because I think that if any of those 3 other things are not in good working order, the nutrition, we're just not going to get done what we want to get done with it. So that's my personal approach. Obviously, I think nutrition is incredibly important. By no means am I saying it's not, but if we're not sleeping, we're not moving our bodies, and we're stressed out, it's going to be really hard to affect meaningful change in the area of nutrition. That's my personal.
Yeah, no, I understand that. And I think that there's been a wonderful highlight in the health space of the importance of sleep and light anchoring, getting that morning light in your eyes, getting the evening light to really signal to the brain that, hey, time for cortisol to come up, time for it to start coming down, and for melatonin to come up. So these practices are incredibly important and really being talked about now, which I think is beautiful.
Yes. And the area of chrononutrition, which is just sort of emerging, of this idea of being in alignment with our circadian rhythm, which kind of sounds woo, but it's not at all. I mean, when you think of, this is, And we can see this in the research on shift workers, how they tend to be less metabolically healthy. When you're staying up late, snacking late into the night, maybe sleeping too late or getting up too early, just not prioritizing this rhythm that every cell in your body has a clock. And if we're constantly fighting that clock, our metabolism and our metabolic health is just not going to be in good working order. So that's a really exciting area of research. I'm looking forward to seeing where that goes, because again, I think it's going to be something that's really individualized, because we're all different in that way. But I think if we could learn to get in better alignment with that, like you're saying, the morning sunlight, and, some people go even so far as to make dinner super early in accordance with when the sun goes down. Do you do that? Yeah. I mean, I think it makes a lot of sense. It can seem, what's the word I'm looking for? I don't know, just a bit of a challenge with the lifestyle of most people. If you're not getting off work until 6, that can be really problematic. But if you have the freedom to really align your schedule with the sun, I mean, that's probably a really good move.
Yeah, whenever my daughters are home from, visiting, they're grown, but when they're home, they laugh. They're like, "You guys are like old people eating at 5:30." And I'm like, "Yes, cool old people."
Healthy old people. I mean, I really think that's going somewhere. I really do. And we do know that we are more insulin sensitive in the morning hours. And especially when a client is either dealing with blood sugar regulation issues or weight or both, I do recommend that she try to get most of her calories in before, say, 2 or 3, and have an earlier dinner.
Ooh, I like that.
Because that is when your body, it appears that is when your body is going to utilize that energy that much better.
So, which leads me to my question of perimenopause. Perimenopause for some women, because women don't know when they're going to go into menopause, there's the average, right, of like 52 or something like that. But, some women go into menopause at 47 or 45. How do you know when to start paying attention to your hormones? Because I'll talk to women who have they're in their late 30s and their period is already lengthening and shortening and kind of like moving all over the map. So how do you know when to start really preparing and treating yourself differently through the perimenopause years? Or what do you recommend?
Yeah, honestly, I kind of like with the health of your brain, I don't think it's ever too early, because like you say, we never know when this is going to happen. A good indicator is, when did your mother go through menopause? That is probably our strongest tip. But perhaps your mother had a hysterectomy in her 30s, as mine did. And so I have no idea. And I don't know when my grandmothers went through menopause. So for me, it was a guessing game. But it's not unusual for a woman to go through menopause in her late 30s. For most women, though, it's more mid 40s, and it lasts about 4 to 8 years. The average age of full transition in the United States is 51. So, but that said, I don't think it's ever too early to be really well attuned to your body and its cycles and what's going on. Again, a lot of women just have dysregulated menstruation from the get-go. And so it can be really difficult to ascertain what's happening, as things are changing. But as you mentioned, the first indicator most women usually have is the change in menstruation, is the change in the cycle. They get farther apart, or they get closer together, or they're spotting in the middle, which is, by the way, any irregular bleeding should always be checked, just to be sure. You don't want to let that go on, because most cases it's not anything serious, but you don't want to take a chance. So if you are bleeding irregularly, you should just go have it checked with your doctor. But that's usually the first indication. And then fatigue, the mood swings, the brain fog, all of that, though, that could be anything, right? I mean, that could be so many things: stress, anxiety, poor sleep, your nutrition. So menstruation is really a key indicator. And then, of course, by the time you hit hot flashes, you're really pretty much at the tail end of perimenopause. So there's all this in between time that stuff could be happening, and you don't really know. There isn't a test for this. I mean, some women do get their hormones tested, but it's so erratic in perimenopause. As you could test one day and things look perfectly, pre-menopausal, and you could test a couple days later and you're flatlining. So there's no real point in doing that. I mean, maybe as a confirmation, or I've seen it be useful if you are, say, in your 30s and you're wondering what's going on, because, that could be useful information. But I would say it's never too early. Always try to be super in tune with your body, taking really good care of yourself. I mean, there are so many illnesses or degree of illness, prevalence of illness, that doesn't have to be. If we were taking care of ourselves in our 20s and 30s, many of us would not progress to midlife dyslipidemia, high blood pressure, insulin resistance, extra intra-abdominal fat, if we were thinking about it earlier.
I did hear in your conversation with Dr. Annie that cholesterol is a big indicator. High cholesterol is a big indicator of Alzheimer's.
Yeah, it's a risk factor. Yeah,
Okay.
for sure. And thank you for bringing that up, because if I have one mission in life, it's to get women to take their cholesterol seriously. And the reason for that is because over the years, and still today, I see so many women with elevated LDL cholesterol, and our cutoff right now is 100 milligrams per deciliter, which is considered normal. But that is not optimal. Optimal is more 70s, 80s, low 90s. And that is probably going to change. That 100 is probably going to be dropped again in the next, say, 10 years. But, and this is absolutely no shade to primary care doctors, general practitioners, many of them are not up to speed on the importance of keeping that LDL nice and low. I often see women who have LDL cholesterol, maybe 110, 120, and maybe their HDL looks nice, it's over 60. So their doctors are saying, don't worry about it. This is outdated advice, no matter what. Even if your HDL is nice and high, which we now realize may not be as protective as we once thought, that LDL needs to be attended to. And you need to know your family history. What other risk factors do you have? Because we might want it more like 70 as opposed to 100. So yeah, thank you for bringing that up. It's really important to address that LDL, because it leads to atherosclerotic cardiovascular disease, which is our number one killer. And it is a risk factor for Alzheimer's disease.
Well, I see these protocols out there, not to throw shade, but like autoimmune protocol and stuff like that, where you have this high saturated fat, animal fat diet, and then they're using coconut, which is also high saturated fat. I mean, isn't that just a recipe? Is that not a recipe for disaster?
I mean, it is in terms of your cardiovascular health and your brain health, for sure. When it comes to autoimmune disease or food allergies, I have seen a more meat-based approach be beneficial initially, like short term, just to because a lot of people do react to plant foods, especially gastrointestinally, but maybe in other ways as well. This should not be a long-term protocol. It should be something more like an elimination protocol, where you get rid of things and see what's bothering you, and eventually add everything back in to see where the sensitivity is. But yes, any diet that is excessively high in saturated fat, we want to be super mindful of, especially in midlife, because that's when our LDL cholesterol gets wonky anyway, because of the erraticism and ultimate decline of estrogen. And if we're consuming a lot of saturated fat on top of it, yes, that is a recipe for disaster.
Well, it's a tool. Well, I think of things like that as a tool. And you made a good point. It's like low FODMAP is a tool, but nobody should live on a low FODMAP diet, because you've
I don't
eliminated.
know. Yeah.
Yeah. It's bonkers to me. I'll meet somebody and they'll be like, oh, I've been on the low FODMAP diet for 2 years. And I'm just like, whoa, you're missing out on all of these important nutrients, when something was supposed to be a 2-week or a month protocol or something ends up being 2 years.
Yes, it's supposed to be an educational tool, like you
Yeah.
said, to learn about your body, see what's bothering you, but ultimately be able to add things back in and not be on this protocol forever. The thing about these diets, carnivore, keto, etc., there are a lot of things, but the main thing that is problematic is you're missing out on fiber, and fiber is so crucial. I know you know that. I know you talk about that a lot. It is so crucial for metabolic health, brain health, overall health, gastrointestinal health. So we don't want, whatever we're doing, whatever we're choosing, we don't want to be missing out on fiber.
Yeah, my mission is in life is for people to stop demonizing beans and to actually eat them. And I love the movement. I would say that over the last 10 years that I've been working with a high fiber diet, is that vegans tend to be the biggest allies in that area because the doctors who are doing research on how important fiber is, not just soluble fiber, but dietary fibers of all types and resistant starch. And, to see kind of the demonization of these important foods was heartbreaking, because how do you demonize a food group that actually helps you live longer?
Well, I know, but I think that people just have to have something to talk about. They like to be contrary. It gets them attention, it makes them money, and that's all there is to it, because there isn't any science behind it. I mean, they make it sound like there is, but there really is not. And so, the whole, I'm not sure if you heard this part, but Dr. Fenn and I did go over sort of anti-nutrients, lectins, oxalates, phytates, and whether or not we really need to worry. And the short of it is no. We really don't. And, the benefit of eating lots of plant foods far outweighs any issues that might arise from, quote, anti-nutrients.
Well, yeah, and you could look at polyphenols as an anti-nutrient because it binds up heme iron, right? So this thing that's actually really important for brain health and human health, you could actually, if you were really going after anti-nutrients, you could cut it out because it blocks iron, right? And women in their menstruating years are oftentimes iron deficient, or their ferritin is low, or
Yeah. I mean, I think anytime someone is speaking in extremes or calling foods toxic, or really, using phrases like what they don't want you to know, kind of stuff, it's, take it all with a giant grain of salt, or maybe just scroll by, because
Well, I think it is fear mongering, which I think is the most sad thing in the social health space, is the fear mongering around perfectly healthy and good foods. I did want to ask you, what is your least favorite false news in the health space?
oh, wow. Do you have an hour? That's the whole hour.
Okay.
No. I think,
Top
boy,
5, top
you
4.
know what I think? I think it would be this, because there are a lot of several books out in the perimenopause, menopause space on this right now, is the insistence that women should be fasting and doing keto. This
Thank
weird
you.
combination of restriction and deprivation and nonsense that it has no evidence behind it whatsoever. But there is this huge, I think there are 3 books that I can think of right now, and I think there are more than that, by very popular, well, 2 of them actually are MDs. One calls herself a doctor, but she's a chiropractor. And, just really pushing this narrative of fasting, and a ketogenic diet. And it's totally unnecessary. It really frustrates me, because I have seen women become disordered from this type of information, and trying it and feeling badly because they can't continue it because it's too difficult. It messes with women's minds and certainly their health. So I think that would be it.
Yeah, the
Can't.
intermittent fasting, I know who you're talking about, she who shall not be named, but the
Although
the
she's getting her name out there big time right now.
yeah, and and I read the books. Like I'm my love language is learning. I love to understand and to broaden my horizons continuously and learn from anybody I can. And I just remember reading that book, looking at it going, there's not only restriction here, but then there's keto, and women's bodies need so much support to have healthy hormone production and nervous system, that I can't imagine that starving yourself doing a 16-8 or, an 18-6. Like, I'm a big believer in breakfast. I'm a big believer in not having fasted workouts personally. I just think we need support.
I agree wholeheartedly. I always encourage breakfast. And I don't, and by that, I don't mean rolling out of bed and having, a spread. I mean a morning meal, after
Yeah.
you've had time to kind of wake up, get your juices flowing. I think it's a great idea. We've got lots of good research that, especially when we include protein, 20, 30 grams of protein at breakfast, we're set up so much better for the rest of the day in terms of energy, blood sugar balance, all of it. So yeah, I'm a big believer too. I'm just about including, what can we include, as opposed to focusing on what we need to eliminate.
Agreed. In your conversation with Dr. Annie Fenn, you talked about how the ApoE4 gene for dementia and Alzheimer's, and then dementia, I believe that's the way it goes, that it's a risk factor, but it isn't, that your epigenetics, your lifestyle, and your stress are actually the biggest. So even if someone like me, I've had my genetics tested, I don't have the genes, but it doesn't mean that I couldn't create that problem later down the road. Is that correct?
Yeah, there are lots of risk factors for Alzheimer's disease and vascular dementia, all forms of dementia. Alzheimer's is just a form of dementia. Many risk factors, unfortunately. Carrying the ApoE4 gene is just one of them.
Okay.
And you can carry one or two copies. One copy is about a 2 to 3 times increased risk. 2 copies is about an 8 to 15 times risk. But as she was saying, yes, your epigenetics plays a huge role here. You can kind of quiet down that gene. And she was talking about this southern region of Italy, where if you carry ApoE4, you are not any more at risk than someone who doesn't. And that entirely has to do, most likely, with lifestyle and nutrition. But here in the United States, it's the level of risk that I talked about, but it is by no means deterministic. There are 3 genes that are deterministic for Alzheimer's disease. If you have them, it is very, very likely, almost certain, that you will develop Alzheimer's, but you would know it because you'd see it in your family, and it's early Alzheimer's, so under the age of 65. Carrying ApoE4, diagnosis is 60s, 70s, but many people who don't carry ApoE4 do go on to have Alzheimer's, and vice versa. People who carry ApoE4 never develop the disease. So taking good care of yourself, using all of the methods that we currently know, and hopefully we'll find out more and more and more, has a major impact on your genetic risk. But if you do have your alleles tested and it turns out you have 1 or 2 copies of ApoE4, there is a set of guidelines for you. So it's not that all hope is lost by any stretch. You want to pay extra attention to your cholesterol, your blood sugar, your intra-abdominal fat, your exercise, all of it.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's really great. I'm happy to hear that, because I do think that, when the breast cancer gene was discovered, everybody wanted to remove their breast who had it, right? And it's just because we carry a gene doesn't mean that that's the ultimate evolution of the gene.
Right. Not at all.
Yeah. So we talked about fasting, which I definitely wanted to hit on because I think it's such an interesting kind of fad that's going on.
Yeah. And I will say, I've had clients for whom it's a great tool for them. They love it. It's working really nicely. And I would never try to talk them out of it. What I'm talking about is women who don't want to do it or struggle with it, who have a history of disordered eating. It is not appropriate for them. And it's by no means something anyone needs to do. If it works for you and you dig it, then have at it. What I do recommend, though, if you enjoy intermittent fasting, like you like your 8-hour window or whatever it is, do shift it to include breakfast. I think that you would probably notice even more benefit if you were, instead of going noon to 8, if you were, say, going, I don't know, 10 to 4 or 9 to 4, sorry. Do you know what I'm saying? So we are taking advantage of that insulin sensitivity earlier in the day. And I also like to say, and this has nothing to do with any fasting theory, but finishing up eating about 2 to 3 hours before hitting the pillow, just because digestion and sleep are 2 major processes that you ask your body to perform, and they don't do either one. Your body doesn't do either one well if you're asking it to do both at the same time. So you digest better if you let the heavy lifting of digestion happen before bedtime, and you sleep better if that's out of the way. So just to make that point.
I agree. I've been doing the eating all morning. I'm usually done eating by 5:30, and then have a 3-hour window or longer before bed, and then try to get like a 12-hour fast overnight. The thing that I find interesting is that there's these people out there that are saying there's all these longevity benefits of fasting, which I don't know is backed up by any real science. But is the main mechanism behind fasting potentially that you are just in calorie restriction and that's why you're losing weight?
In terms of fat loss, yes. There's no long-term difference between intermittent fasting and calorie restriction in terms of fat loss. So there's that piece of it. Then the other metabolic benefits, like improved blood sugar or LDL cholesterol or any of that, that may have to do with fat loss if you've lost weight or improved your body composition by also strength training, creating a bigger reservoir for glucose by building muscle mass. Any of the longevity benefits, we don't really have that in humans. We've had it in, I believe, I want to say mice and flies, which you can't pull that data and say that it has the same benefit in humans. And I think I want to say that there was something that demonstrated some benefit after, I want to say it was 36 hours of fasting or something, but nobody's doing that. Nobody should do that, and I hesitate to even say that, but I know that there is something out there about a really extended fast, but there's such a contraindication because that would not be a health promoting lifestyle. So it's complicated. I would say, no, we don't really want to be thinking about the longevity benefits. It's more if this is a kind of structure, if that structure works for you and you enjoy it and it doesn't feel stressful, do it by all means, but it's not anything anyone needs to do. There's nothing magical about it.
Yeah, that's what I thought I understood from everything I gathered, is that it wasn't a magic. It was potentially for weight loss, a calorie deficit because you're shortening your window. But then I also saw people say like, oh, well, yeah, but if you're eating, 3,000 calories in that short window, then you're back to where you started and you're
Right.
probably not going to lose weight. So it's just whether or not, yeah.
Exactly. It only is going to happen if what most people are doing is they're eliminating a meal.
Right.
And so, yes, if that's like 300 to 500 calories a day that you're eliminating, yeah, that's going to be pretty successful, but that's all you've done.
So there's a whole entire group of people out there that demonize nuts. What are your thoughts on that?
Oh, nuts are one of the very best things you can eat for your brain. I mean, all the vitamin E, and then we've got the fiber, and it's got a little bit of protein, and they're really satisfying. I mean, yeah, all good stuff. I'm not buying that one.
Seed oils is a big one. We know a lot of big influencers
Oh
out
boy.
there.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's a really, really unfortunate one, and is entirely a product of social media fear mongering. There's no good evidence behind it. Now, nobody's suggesting that you go out and drink a bottle of canola oil, but there is no good evidence that they are inflammatory. And it does appear that when they replace saturated fat in your diet, they are cardioprotective. Now, some of the research that didn't show that benefit was when refined carbohydrates were the replacement. So if we're replacing saturated fat with refined carbohydrates, no, we don't see a benefit. But when we replace saturated fats with polyunsaturated fats, we do see a benefit to cardiovascular disease risk. So,
What are your thoughts on organ meats? All the people that are eating a lot of organs.
I mean, not my preference. So it's not part of my repertoire. I would say be very mindful of the saturated fat. We want to be trying to keep our total saturated fat intake to less than 10% of our total calories, less than 7% if you're at risk for heart disease or it's already begun. So if you can have some heart or some spleen and it fits within that 7 to 10%, I mean, have at it, or liver or whatever. But I certainly don't think it's anything anybody needs.
I'm always fascinated by with all the liver eating isn't there because we store vitamin A, isn't there a possibility of vitamin A toxicity
For
from eating all
sure.
that liver?
Yeah. And I have had clients who have actually reached that because they love pate.
Mm.
And so, yes, I have had only a few, but I have had clients who have had vitamin A toxicity because they just couldn't get enough pate. So, so it absolutely can happen. So that's something to be mindful of as well.
I see some of these trends and, I definitely, my parents raised me, I would say, if anything, more in the Weston A. Price kind of like eating the whole animal and raw milk and all that stuff. So I moved away from it in my 20s, but it was really this idea that saturated fat on a high level is really good for you. And I think there's this misunderstanding that it creates some sort of cell flexibility. Have you heard that? Like, oh, it's making your cells more flexible when you eat all the saturated fat. When in fact, I think a saturated fat is saturated.
No, we don't need saturated fat for cellular structure or flexibility. Really, the only fat that we need, like truly, truly need, is omega-3 fatty acids. Now, we do need omega-6 as well, but it's not hard to get, enough omega-6. It's in nuts and seeds and many meats and certainly ultra processed foods. That's the food I think that may be where the whole hysteria around omega-6 fats came from, is that they are typically used in ultra processed foods because they're less expensive, more shelf stable, but it's not the fat, it's the whole package.
Right.
But no, the only fat the human body actually needs to consume on a regular basis is omega-3 fatty acids and omega-6. Omega-6, most of us do not have an issue getting. It's the omega-3s that we want to prioritize. That said, monounsaturated fats appear to be anti-inflammatory. So that would be the number one choice: olive oil, avocado oil. There is a lot of monounsaturated in nuts and seeds, although they're mostly poly. But no, we don't need saturated fat.
We don't. So there's no benefit. So for anybody listening who's on a high saturated fat diet with coconut oil and dairy, and so there is no benefit to having saturated fat in your diet at a high level?
No, there really isn't. There's no harm in having a little. So it's not like we have to be afraid of it or worry about it. We definitely want to be mindful of it and minimize it if we are concerned about our cardiovascular health and our brain health. But it's not something to be fearful of, but it's not anything we need to consume.
So if somebody's an omnivore, it's better to stay with the lean cuts versus the fatty cuts. Okay.
And cook with olive oil, avocado oil. Those would be the two top choices. And avocado being more useful at higher temperatures and olive at lower temperatures.
I love it. You're preaching to the choir over here. I'm excited to hear it.
It's fun to talk to like-minded people. I don't mind a good challenge every once in a while, but it's also good to commiserate.
Well, I also like knowing that, everything I'm reading is confirmed. This is your field of study. And I love hearing that feedback because it's important to me to age gracefully, to age well, to do everything I can to have a healthy menopause when it comes. It was only at 47 that I started to feel the shift. And it was in body composition where suddenly I went and got my blood work done and my blood pressure had shifted, and I was eating the same. I just had to change. I started changing my workouts and focusing more on protein and weight training. And then things went back to normal. But had I not been paying attention, you can see how you can just slide into a ditch without knowing it. Like, it's scary.
Absolutely right. And I'm so glad you brought that up. Dr. Fenn and I did talk about this a bit. One of the things I say, and like I said in that little chat we had, is that it is important to become a good patient in your middle years, because something else I said is that I like to see cholesterol, A1C, blood pressure taken at least annually. Now, that is not the general guideline. The general guideline is something more like every 2 or 3 years. I don't think that's frequent enough for women in midlife because in fact, I just saw it this morning. I had a client this morning last year at this time. Her LDL cholesterol was 95. It is now 110. 1 year, and she hasn't changed anything except that she is further into perimenopause. So I do think, and exposure time matters with high blood sugar, high blood pressure, high LDL cholesterol. So hopefully your insurance will do at least an annual, pay for annual lab work. If it doesn't, there are co-ops where you can get discounts. You talk to your doctor, but I just think it's important for midlife women to have these numbers checked annually, at least.
I do too, because I feel like the power of blood work is the trend, watching the trend versus if you get blood work once or twice in your life, you have nothing to know where your starting or end point is. And, it is expensive, but I feel like allowing our health to decline unknowingly because a lot of these things don't have symptoms.
Right. No, they're silent. And that is the thing. Our metabolic health, until it becomes a really big problem, is silent. We don't know we have high blood pressure or high blood sugar or wonky cholesterol. So that's why we are pretty aware if we are accumulating excess intra-abdominal fat, but we're not aware of what that looks like on the inside. So having that checked annually is really a step in the right direction. Yes, it costs money, but so does medication, so does illness.
I was ill for 3 years and I spent all of my savings in doctor's visits and everything that I had to do. And it made me realize that being proactive and dedicating to health is a way better way to go and cheaper way to go in the long run.
Yes, it really, in the long run, it 100% is. I think that, you said asked in the very beginning, what can younger women do? It's that start paying attention to these things now. And what I'm also huge about self-advocacy in your doctor's office, your provider's office. If you have someone who is not hearing you about getting your labs done annually, listening to you about perimenopause symptoms, something else Dr. Annie and I were talking about was that hot flashes, not all hot flashes, not the hot flashes that most of us us get, but really intense, frequent sweating, really getting red, significant night sweats where you're changing your clothes. This has a link to Alzheimer's disease and certainly cardiovascular disease. So, I mean, they're associated, don't quite know how, but probably because it means on a low level vascular disease. So that's a symptom to mention. And if your doctor is unaware of the research or if they dismiss it, might be time to find somebody who listens. I think that we can, I've had many clients who have had the same doctor for 20 years. You have different needs now. There's nothing wrong with switching it up and moving on to somebody who really gets you at this stage in your life.
100% agree. And also, we're not talking about men today, but I will say for men, like my husband was having night sweats and I was like, go get your blood work done. He's 55. He did, and his ApoB was high, his cholesterol was high, his blood sugar was out of range. He definitely had a different diet than I did, but that scared him into action. He changed his diet. He's no longer sweating through the sheets every night. He was just like, oh, I don't know why I'm sweating through the sheets. And I'm like, yeah, that's a sign that things are not good.
That's right. Yeah, we have to pay attention to ourselves. And, it has a lot to do with our culture too. We're so productivity driven, just forget it. Like, it's all about, let's just, get stuff done and be really productive. We need to take a step back and pay attention to ourselves because we don't need to have all of the illness that we have. And part of it is that we are just trying to motor through and we're dismissing ourselves, let alone being dismissed in a provider's office. So we need to get on it and pay really good attention to ourselves and take really good care of ourselves. And it's never too early.
Yeah, and your 4 pillars really covered off the nourishing food, the quality sleep, the daily movement, the stress skills, keeping that cortisol from overtaking the entire endocrine system, on a regular basis. I think these are such important, actionable steps to start thinking about. So thank you so much for coming on and chatting with me. I know that we missed each other a bit, but I was like, okay, this is happening and I'm really excited. So thank you
so much. I really appreciate you. It's been really fun talking to you. So thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you. And thank you for everybody. Where can they find you? Is Instagram the best place to find you? I love your Instagram, by the way. So
thank you so much. Yeah, the Cognition Dietition on Instagram, but then also my website is barbieboules.com. And so you can connect with me through there as well.
There's a lot of wonderful information just across the board on Barbie's Instagram. I've enjoyed taking it in and learning. So definitely go check it out.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
All right. Thank you so much. I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Barbie Boules, the Cognition Dietitian, and you got as much out of it as I did, really contemplating my brain health, my heart health. As a woman in her perimenopausal years, I am noticing the shifts that are naturally happening, and I eat well. Like, it's kind of crazy. So if you are struggling, know that you are not alone. And if you are young, contemplating menopause and perimenopause doesn't make any sense because you're thinking about fertility and having babies, know that now is a wonderful time for you to start contemplating your long-term health. So have a wonderful day, night, or wherever you are in this beautiful world.